everyone, it's Monday at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and this is Admissions Live. I'm your host, Nicole Lentine, and today on the show I'm speaking to Rebecca Stapley, Assistant Director of Admission at Nazareth College, to discuss cultivating the roles of current students to support admission goals and success. Admissions Live is part of the Higher Ed Live Network, a series of professional development web shows and podcasts which are always free and accessible to you in the archives at higheredlive.com and on iTunes. Be a part of our broadcast today by tuning in live and sharing your insights and questions using the Higher Ed Live hashtag on Twitter. You can receive weekly updates with live show dates and times by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter, and we are tweeting a link out to that right now. Today's show would not be possible without the support of Champlain College and M. Stoner. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. Check out M. Stoner's latest groundbreaking book, Follow the Leader, authored by Dan Zions, and edited by Michael Stoner. Filled with insights, anecdotes, and profiles of leaders who have successfully used social media in their roles as college and university presidents, this book offers sound advice to novices and experts alike, and for those who advise them. We're tweeting out a link now where you can learn more about Follow the Leader. Admissions Live is sponsored by Chegg Enrollment Services. Chegg Enrollment Services is hosting a special webinar on March 3rd titled Building Your Transfer Outreach Action Plan. Leveraging recent research alongside industry best practices, this webinar will help you as you fill your enrollment gaps as well as focus on the strategic population of potential transfer students. Sign up using the link we'll be tweeting out momentarily, or visit edu.chegg.com for more details. So with that, I will turn it over to kind of sharing a little bit about the topic we're speaking about today, and we're continuing with our silo busting month this month of really focusing on our connection with student affairs. And we thought, but what better topic to focus on than the role of current students in the admissions office? And so I'm very, very excited to have Rebecca on. You may remember her from our Live from High Ed Web broadcast, but this is her first time being the solo guest on here. And she's had such a wonderful variety of experiences working with students and student leaders and just all sorts of different roles within the admissions office. I'm very excited to have her on. So Rebecca, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your history in higher ed and in admissions?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me back again. I was really excited to be here and talk about something that I love and I think is so important. Like many of us admissions counselors on the counseling side, got my start as a student worker in admissions. And that was a job I had all 4 years, and I really grew with that, and it was so much fun and became such a big piece of my college experience. And then for the last 5 years, I've been working in admissions in higher ed, and it's amazing to see how my role transformed and really integrated students. I coordinated our student ambassador program at Nazareth, so our tour guides, everything from apps processing for 2 years, and I now lead a group of about 13 students who are part of our social media team and do a lot of different roles in aiding that with me.
Fantastic. So I'm excited to talk about all the different roles that you've had because I love the fact that, just like myself too, you started as in the student role, so I think you probably brought in a lot of kind of insight and perspective into, you know, working with these students later on. Is that fairly right to assume?
Oh yeah, absolutely. When you live it, you have a whole different kind of understanding of their experience because their lives are so full, and the admissions piece and, you know, working there is such a big thing, but they're a part of everything, and I think it's so important to understand that.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that jumps right into sort of our opening question of, you know, why is this topic so important? You know, why is it so important to get current students involved in the application process and everything we do, the events, the outreach, and everything else?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the amazing thing is that we depend, at least at my institution, very heavily on students every step of the admissions and the enrollment process. And I think that it's so important to know your students and get them involved because they are living this every day. You know, their experience in giving them a voice is really the most authentic and powerful way to communicate value and communicate the experience of being a student at your institution.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, that you spoke a little bit about the roles that your students have held, and I think that really gives insight into, you know, not just looking at, okay, what is the life like of a student who's, you know, working in the admissions office, but, you know, I saw that you have students who, like you said, you have bloggers, you have tour guides, you have all these different roles. So can you talk a little bit more about all those different roles you've overseen and kind of maybe breaking down sort of maybe some of the positions they've held in the office, but also other things that they're involved in? Because I think that really gives breadth to sort of what their experience on your campus is like.
Absolutely. So I'll start with the roles that are actually in the office. It's such a broad range of different positions, and I think what's beautiful about that is that you encourage students to understand their strengths, which really serves them to get to know themselves better and also to develop those strengths. So, you know, if we have a student who really loves being in front of families, interacting one-on-one, you know, they're a great candidate to be a tour guide, a huge part of what we do in admissions. And then the other, you know, piece just as important are our behind-the-scenes students who are helping us process a crazy amount of apps every year. And they're just as important, and maybe they sometimes have a different set of skills to do that. In the same way that our students who are on the social media team, you know, our bloggers, it's so important to kind of identify that creativity, that spark, and even just their, you know, desire to get to work with this medium as well. So within that, and what I love about all the different roles, whether they're a tour guide or working in the office, is that they're able to bring their own personality and their own experience, and it's a platform for them to share that. So I've worked with, you know, the captain of our ultimate frisbee team, a lot of spirit there. I have had, you know, presidents of different academic organizations like our nursing club. We even have a class president right now, JP, one of my bloggers, and, you know, all different leadership roles across campus. And they have such a diverse, you know, experience and interest, and this is their time to shine and to really share about what's important to them. And that's truly, you know, I think what prospective students, families, that's what we're trying to communicate and what they really are interested in hearing right from the source.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely right. And actually, that's funny. We have our class president, or actually SGA president, working as a student ambassador here too. So it's funny to have somebody in that leadership role. You know, they really do bring a very different perspective from their time outside of the office into their roles here in admissions. So that's great. Well, kind of branching into what you taught, you tapped into this a little bit. You know, what value do you believe that these positions provide? You know, of course, getting to provide a voice to the school, but, you know, using the example, you said his name was JP, was the class president?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, somebody like him, what, you know, can talk a little bit about maybe the stories that they can share that we are a little bit less mindful of as admission counselors?
Absolutely. I mean, it's all about their stories, and, you know, I think what it is that they really care about, and when you let them tap into what they're passionate about, whether it's frisbee, whether it's being on the equestrian team, whether it's something that happened to them as they were a prospective student trying to make that decision as to, you know, where to go after high school. It's just so important to really let them share that piece, because it's so authentic, and there's really, you know, such an interest to hear that story, to have that there. And I think it's good for them because they're learning to reflect on these things, and they're starting to look, you know, inward and see, okay, look at the strengths that I have. I'm a leader in this position, and maybe I want to try something new and try in this new leadership role. So it's really just a point for them to start at, and then I think what I try to do with my students is just help them to develop on a personal level, on a professional level, and open up new experiences through the admissions, you know, kind of gateway that they might not have had otherwise, and to really foster that process at every step that I can.
Yes, and I think you really hit the nail on the head with it's not just benefiting us as an office, but it's also benefiting these students. And I love the fact that you're talking about, they're considering themselves for other leadership roles. They're thinking about their involvement elsewhere. Do you have any good examples of like students who maybe didn't realize the skills that they had until they worked with you and then went on to do things that maybe they wouldn't have done otherwise?
Yeah, absolutely. So many. I mean, actually, when I was leading the student ambassador program, the big group, I created a leadership team, and one of my right-hand man, I called him Matt, he started as he was a little bit reserved, a little quiet, and it was just amazing to see him come out of his shell. And I gave him a lot of responsibility. And as he went through each year, he took on more and more. And he really developed his own opinion and, voice. And I would come to him if I needed to hash something else or, figure something out. And he went on, he was the one who was actually captain of his Frisbee team. But beyond that, he did a lot of amazing research, and he actually has went on to be a Fulbright scholar and is currently, living and working in Europe. He's bilingual, and it's just amazing to see how his life has really expanded and the amazing things he's doing now. And it was just, wonderful to be able to work alongside him and kind of be a small part of that process.
That's awesome. And yeah, I think all of us have these like great kind of stories that stick with us like that. These students that we know they have the potential, but it just takes a little bit of cultivation and a little bit of support to really see them take off and flourish. And I know you and I both share the connection of I had my own student Emma, who I worked with through her last 2 years here at Champlain. She now is actually working up there at Nazareth, and I know you work with her very frequently. But she was in that same type of position that she already had the skills and the ability. It just took a little bit of kind of support and encouraging her to take that leadership role, and she went above and beyond. I can't take any credit for that, but it was cool to watch that growth through the experiences she had in the admissions office to kind of help support her through the way.
And yeah. She is awesome, and it's just amazing to watch that. And I really do believe, our students, they are capable of so much. They're just so awesome. So it's really cool to see them realize.
Definitely. Definitely, yeah. And you brought up two other things that I really want to tap into, because one I think is an interesting topic of sort of the idea of compensation for these roles. And, I mean, a lot of these roles are paid, but sometimes they're not. And I think that where they're especially where there are roles that aren't paid, but the ones that are as well, there's so much more that students are taking away from it that, yeah, money is important to a college student, but so are these learning experiences and these growth opportunities. And so I know you had spoken about some of kind of the trainings and speakers that you bring in. So can you talk about kind of some of those opportunities that your students get that maybe other students on campus might not get if they weren't working in the admissions office?
Absolutely. And I think it's just so important to know that, value and creating value isn't just, as much as incentives are good and important, it's not just, oh, let's have free pizza. So, really thinking, getting creative in any way. And I think that training is huge. I always want to set up my students for success and give them all the tools that I can. We led a social media training day recently, and I actually decided to take it off campus. We were able to get the space at Next Step U, and it was awesome just to take them out of our campus environment, show them a professional environment, and really getting to use that for an entire day. And our training, we hit on everything from, social media tools that maybe they weren't aware of, things like TweetDeck, the ability to schedule their tweets, and kind of new ways to make their job a little bit easier. And they love that. And the other thing that I think is great is exposing them to, leaders in the field. And I love to bring in guest speakers. I brought in, during one of our social media meetings, David Mamano, who is just amazing, to come and talk about his experience and his relationship, to social media, but as an entrepreneur. And also Danielle Ramo, who is a co-founder of the Rochester Brainery. and she does a lot of social media. So having them come in to tell their stories so that our students can see, not only can this help me right now, but it can help me in a future career, even if it's not a specific social media career, and just kind of open their horizons and just expose them to the awesome, skills that they're getting.
Yeah, definitely. And I love the idea of sometimes pushing them, I think, beyond their comfort zone just a little bit is never a bad thing. I love, there's an example of, wasn't a student who worked in admissions in this particular instance, but was a marketing student here at Champlain and didn't want to do anything with Twitter, just hated the idea of using Twitter, but was pushed by her faculty member to be able to get on there. And through being involved in her conversations on Twitter, she actually now works at HubSpot and has co-written a book about networking and being on Twitter and how to use Twitter. It's Twitter for Dummies, I think, is the actual title of it. But it's just funny to see, that, and so the speakers that you're bringing your students to and these experiences off campus, I do think they have such huge lasting impressions on their job prospects down the road and on the connections that they've made. So I think that's great advice to anybody who's working with a team to think about doing that, because I think you can get so caught up in the routine of how you're working with them and the week to week that you don't think about, bringing in these outside experiences.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let me make sure I'm getting the right question here. I wanted to talk a little bit about what's your interview process like? I know that it may be different for these different roles, but generally speaking, how do you really vet these students, because their voice is so important, and a lot of times they're setting that first impression, sometimes the only impression that families are getting. So how do you make sure that you're picking the right students?
Absolutely. And I mean, this is huge. And I mean, it's a really important process that I think we're all constantly trying to think, how can I improve this? So one thing that we do, I think, really well is that we utilize our students as part of that interview process. So we will send out, put up posters and send out emails letting them know that, admissions positions, are available to be a student ambassador. And then we'll go through the initial paperwork to, kind of see what people are involved in, see the group that we're working with. And then when we actually do bring people in for interviews, before they would even meet with me, I would have my student leadership team, so, my most trusted student leaders actually, in pairs, pre-interview each candidate. And without talking to them, they'd bring the candidate in, and I would then interview them, follow up, and afterwards we could, get together. And that was so valuable, because not only am I seeing the student, the way they're presenting themselves to me, but how a prospective, student ambassador presents themselves to their peers, I think is very important. And because our student ambassadors, because they actually are living this, they really, know what it takes to be a really, really good ambassador. And that is just, absolutely essential to what we do here. So the way that they understand it, they can really see if another student shows that. And I think part of it is being comfortable, and there's a part of the job that is trained, but there's also a part of the job that comes naturally. So when a student is really loving life here and they want to share that experience, and I think it's being able to see that in the students that we're considering, for a role, meeting with students and working with us.
That's so true. I mean, they have to be at least a little bit of a cheerleader for your institution. Otherwise, maybe a little bit harder for them to do their roles and do them well. And I think within reason, of course, I think anybody could have a few things they'd want to change about the institution, but you want people who are happy that to be here, to be talking to those families.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's all about that authentic voice. And I love that you said that, because, we're not looking for students that are just, going to message admissions messaging. They have their own opinions and their own voice, and that's what's so important, because that's what keeps it so authentic. But it's the way that they present and can communicate any of their ideas. And I think that's kind of, something that we look at, but something that also will get developed the longer that they grow with the program.
No, that's so true. And yeah, some of it will come through growth, but I think they got to come in at least initially being happy to be there, because that's something that's pretty difficult to train into somebody.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, actually, you bring up a good question that I hadn't really considered before, but, what happens if you have a student in one of these leadership roles and they have a frustration with the school for some reason, and maybe it's very well founded, have you found yourself getting involved in that conversation, or do you connect them with somebody? How do you kind of manage that? Because obviously you have a job, you have your own job to make sure that they're providing a good experience for your family, but you also want to make sure your student's happy. So how do you really address that?
Absolutely. And I haven't had too many experiences where there's any like a really big problem or frustration, but as anyone just living on the school, eating the food every day, things come up. And I think I see my role as really a connector. So I'm here to listen, and definitely whatever they have to say, even if it's, maybe not positive, it's important, just as important, that I hear that and know what's going on, and then connect students to the right channels where, their voice can be effective at maybe creating a change. And that's why I think it's also so important to be involved on campus and to know the faculty and know the staff. I think because situations like that where maybe someone really just needs to feel heard, and maybe there's something that's not being brought to the attention of someone that could really actually impact, student life on a greater level. So I think that being that connector, and for me, I also teach yoga here at the school, and I know, people in the Center for Spirituality, as well as, faculty, and I think that when students come to me with something that maybe I really feel like I can connect them to someone else that really can listen or be a part of that change if there's something that they just want to talk about.
Yeah, I do think that idea of connectivity is so important, because especially when you're working so much with a whole group of people that are very deeply impacted by the decisions made by the institution and what happens at the institution, you need to be aware of what's happening and need to know who to talk to when there's a problem. Do you find that your students who are involved in social media conversations, do you find that you're having them see any other current students having these conversations too? I mean, do you ever get involved in sort of those that aren't in your immediate group and team of students, but they're seeing conversations that maybe cause you worry? How have you dealt with that piece?
I think that piece, and I haven't had to deal with it a whole lot, knock on wood, things have been, but I think it's just kind of, it's awareness, and it's, sometimes checking, maybe the not my institutional, sponsored, Twitter accounts, and really seeing what are students saying. It's kind of even the bad, and it's just being aware. And I find that typically some of those, it's like a small group, and at least here students seem pretty happy, but it's really, knowing the negative is just as important, and realizing what's out there, even if it's small, because it could become my problem very quickly, and you have to be aware of what's out there and kind of really be listening at all time. I think it's not just participating, but listening, especially in social media, is such a huge part of what we do, and it's amazing that we actually have the channel to be able to do that.
Definitely. It's funny to have an ear to the ground kind of the institution through social media, and I do think we have a responsibility that we take on when we're looking and listening to those conversations.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I want to definitely get into the last topic of conversation, because I think it's one that really is a nice one to end on. But I do want to, remind our viewers to please, if you have any questions for Rebecca or for myself, use the Higher Ed Live hashtag. I am keeping an eye on Twitter, so I will make sure to answer your questions if you have them. But in the spirit of sort of silo busting and looking at this overlap of student affairs and admissions, we've already talked about it a lot, but I just am purely curious, do you feel like you have a good relationship with those in the student affairs position at your institution? And, kind of, have you learned important things from that relationship?
Absolutely. And I think if I'm going to have a good relationship with my students, I think that I really have to have a good relationship with student affairs and all of the different resources on campus, because, I'm getting to know them, and that is part of them and an extension of how I can support them as a leader as well. And I've found that everyone, student affairs, residential life, all of the different resources on campus, they've been amazing. And I think just taking an admissions, at least, I think we can get a little bit stuck sometimes in the admissions piece, but getting past that and really getting to know the people, across departments is so essential and important, and those relationships have meant so much to me. And I know that any time that something comes up that maybe I don't have the answer to or just need, they're always more than willing to help. They inform me. I know that my information is up to date and correct, and I know who I can go to, and being able to do that for my students, that's awesome.
Yeah, I definitely think that's huge. That's just, it's focusing on that interconnectivity, but also just showing our students both prospective and current. We do communicate as an institution. We talk to each other, and we want to make sure we are looking out for the best interests of our students. I think sometimes students can feel a little bit jaded and feel like we're not, but those pipelines of communication are so vital to make sure that, the sort of voice that we're giving in admissions really reflects the actual institution that we're trying to bring students into.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I'm checking Twitter. I haven't seen anything yet, but we'll certainly hop on questions if anybody sends them our way. We have a few minutes left. But Rebecca, you had mentioned you kind of have sort of, maybe not a tip sheet specifically, but sort of tips in general for the best way to work with current students. So, I guess this is a really nice space where if people are going to be new to working with current students or want to just improve the way that they work with their student employees, what kinds of tips would you give them?
Absolutely, and it's something that I wish maybe I'd had when I was thrown into, managing a large group of students. But I think one of the key things is organization, as basic as that sounds, because in order to, organize a group of students, personal organization, whatever your method of organization is fine, but you need to have one because that's going to be essential, especially as you move forward and are able to cultivate leaders and give them more roles and responsibilities. And the other thing I'd say right after that is just from the very beginning, being very clear about expectations and having clear communication. I think that is just huge, and from the very beginning. And then to follow up on that, just really holding myself accountable for keeping those channels of communication clear, and not only keeping myself accountable, but keeping my students accountable as well, and following up on that. So I always, when I begin a meeting, when I begin the semester, I think I always like to start with expectations. That can sometimes lead into sharing goals, especially institutional goals. By becoming a student leader, they are part of the inside, and I owe it to them for them to really get to see that. And then we come up with, ways to measure as we go along too, which they really, get to have ownership and to be a part of that process. So I think those are the biggest things for me. One little tip, I guess, with the communication key is that think about how students are communicating. I know that when I first came on, there would often be lengthy emails about information, and students, at least here, get really a lot of email. So we may have made specific groups. I made one for our student ambassadors within Facebook, and then also for the leaders or social media team. And it's oftentimes that they would be much more, apt to see a little notification on Facebook and read it before they're checking through all their emails, and just make sure that there's multiple ways to communicate with them, and that I'm on top of that so that they can reach me and that I can get to them. And then the second piece, which seems obvious, but I think I've really it's an art, is being concise and organized again. And if I send them an email, they don't want to read a novel, so just really keeping it as short and informative as possible. And the feedback that I've gotten from students about that has been that they really appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're so right that they do. They get bombarded with so much information, and I think if you set clear goals, clear expectations, it makes a world of difference. And I think we're all struggling with that. I'm in the same boat with the students I work with. It's really just trying to say, this is our goal for this, and this is how I need your help in getting there.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then I think the rest just kind of falls into place, and I think that's where, the leadership roles are constantly evolving based on, what we need and the strengths that we see in our students, and then we can give them even more tools to help, meet those goals and meet, the expectations. And I think it's important that it is a constant, it's a two-way street too. It is also about listening to how that's going, sometimes reevaluating, and really being open to, the communication from the students as much as I'm communicating to them.
Yeah, that's so true, is going back and looking and seeing what worked and what didn't instead of just rehashing the same thing. It's going to make a difference. And I love your point about, the way that students communicate now. I gave up on emails very, very early on, and I've gone pretty consistently to Facebook, Twitter, and even with one student, I found Snapchat's the fastest way I'll ever get to catch her for anything. So, you have to kind of learn your students' methods a little bit more to be able to make sure that communication is as open as can be, and that they're getting to find out what your goals are for them real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then constantly, this is the fun part, but just acknowledging and recognizing a job well done, and just really, letting them feel the appreciation, because, like I said, every step of what we do is so dependent on them. So I think it's a great opportunity, not just in times when it's busy and you need them, but just all the time, just be encouraging and recognizing the great work that they do. Yes,
that's definitely huge. They need to remember that they are deeply appreciated, because I don't know, I'm sure I can speak for your office too. We would be lost without our student employees.
Totally.
Yeah, and actually, we got a question on Twitter, and I think it sort of loops into that appreciation a little bit, but David Boyd just wanted clarification or elaboration on the compensation provided to student ambassadors throughout, don't know if that was admit process, but even over the years. So I know you had mentioned that your students primarily get paid is it a work study or contractual position? Can you talk a little bit more just briefly about that?
Absolutely. At least at our institution, ours is not strictly work study, so it's just a job. They do have to interview, and they're paid the campus wage, for hourly wages. I think for me, it's wonderful that our institution does pay our student workers, and I know that that's not always the case. And I find that, like you said, it's so much beyond just a paycheck, and I know that, my students do so much, and I think it's value by getting them involved, so that they enjoy what they're doing. This should be fun. I had a blast when I worked in admissions, and I really try to make it fun and a way for my students to get to know each other, get to know the staff. And also, with the leadership roles, it's an opportunity for more hours. And at least for me with the social media team, it's flexible hours, because they're tweeting between classes, they're blogging on a time schedule that works well for them. So they have a tremendous amount of flexibility, but also the ability to be precise and log those hours for more pay. And then exposure to things like guest speakers. And, at every meeting, it is little things, but, making sure there's snacks, and, also that they have my time if they want to come and talk to me. Not that that's a huge value, but, any way that you can, just creating value, making them feel appreciated, and kind of putting it into the larger perspective just beyond the office. One thing that we've started doing with my blog group is also, you know, our social media team, when we meet and go over analytics and kind of what's working, we'll kind of choose a blogger that we want to highlight for their great work. And, you know, it might be, you know, hey, here's, you know, a gift certificate to Chipotle or whatever it is, you know, little things that maybe I can do just to let them know, even if it's a paper plate award, just that you're appreciated, we recognize what you're doing.
I love that. Yeah, it does. It just takes that extra minute, that extra bit of thought to be able to say, you know what, they went above and beyond and I want to recognize them. And I love that you build that in just alongside, you know, the pizza parties and everything else. I mean, I do think there's something to be said about a consistent pizza party every few months or whatever. But yeah, I think we can provide so much value to them in our roles and in our connections with them, and so helping them to network and helping them to build those skills is just as much compensation as the actual numerical amount.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I'm checking one more time, but I don't see any other questions on Twitter. But if anybody does have any further questions after the show today, I am at @nlentini. It's right in my lower third here on the screen. Rebecca is R. Stapley, as you can see. So please feel free to tweet to either of us or to the Higher Ed Live handle as well, and using the hashtag if you have any questions after the show. I know that Rebecca already said that she'd be happy to chat with you, and I would be as well. So thank you again so much, Rebecca, for being back on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been my pleasure. We'll make sure to get you back on here another time.
That's great.
Yeah, and thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Thanks, as always, to our program sponsors, M. Stoner and Chegg Enrollment Services. Coming up next on Higher Ed Live tomorrow, Wednesday, host Heather Shea Gasser speaks with the ACPA Convention Planning Team about all the ways that individuals can consider, collaborate, create, and commit at the conference in Tampa. Get reminders about this and other great shows by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter. Browse the archives at higheredlive.com or subscribe to the Higher Ed Live podcast on iTunes. I'm back. And I actually want to really recommend those podcasts, in particular if you're in admissions, because they are awesome on the road. So download a bunch and check them out in the springtime especially. Thank you again. I'm Nicole Lentine, back next month with more Admissions Live.